Why you're tired after 8 hours of sleep. It's 7 a.m. The alarm goes off. You've been in bed for 8 hours, maybe even more, and you feel like you've been hit by a truck. Your eyes are dry, your limbs are slow, your brain is somewhere 3 floors below where it needs to be. And the strangest part? You did everything right. Here's what's actually happening, and why the advice you've been given about sleep has been solving the wrong problem entirely. You're listening to Your Space Today, the podcast where we decode fatigue, stress, and burnout so you can rise again. Every Tuesday, we explore the hidden connections between your habits, your health, and your happiness, giving you the tools to take back your energy and your life. The 9 a.m. fog. Let's start with something I want you to name. Not just feel, name. That specific heaviness, the one that sits behind your eyes. The one where you're technically awake, technically upright, technically functioning, but there's this strange lag between you and the world, like you're watching your own morning through frosted glass. You reached for your phone. Maybe you hit snooze. Maybe you lay there for a few extra minutes hoping something would shift. It didn't. And here's the part that might be quietly eating at you, because you're not someone who ignores their health. You went to bed at a reasonable hour. You weren't out late. You weren't drinking. You did what the advice said. 8 hours. Done. So why does your body feel like it received 0 of that? Meet James. James is an IT project manager, mid-40s, 2 kids, decent job. From the outside, he's holding it together well. He goes to bed at a reasonable hour, doesn't drink during the week, and has even started keeping his phone out of the bedroom. Sensible choices, all of them. But every morning, James wakes up feeling like the sleep didn't happen. He lies there for a few minutes, hits snooze once, maybe twice, and arrives at the office already behind. Not dramatically, just dimmed, like the brightness on his screen is turned down and he can't find the slider. What James doesn't know is that the choices he's making, the ones that look entirely reasonable from the outside, are quietly interrupting his brain's most important nightly process, before it can finish. Most people in James's position arrive at one of 2 conclusions. Either they tell themselves they need more sleep, so they start going to bed earlier, sleeping longer, maybe even napping, and somehow the tiredness gets worse. Or they decide this is just who they are now, that they've never been a morning person, that this is the price of a full life. You're not lazy, and this is not a personality trait. What James, and a lot of people like him, is experiencing has a name. Researchers call it sleep inertia. It's a real, measurable neurological state that happens in the transition from sleep to wakefulness. The grogginess isn't imaginary. The lag isn't weakness. It's chemistry. And the reason it keeps happening isn't sleeping too little. It's that the way he's sleeping and the way he's waking is leaving his brain mid-cycle, mid-process, mid-clean. Think about what happens if you pull laundry out of the washing machine halfway through the cycle. The clothes are wet, the soap is still in there, they haven't been rinsed. More time in the machine isn't what they needed. They needed to finish the right cycle. Sleep works exactly the same way. And in a few minutes, I'll show you exactly where the cycle is breaking down and what you can do tomorrow morning that takes less than a minute and genuinely changes how you feel. But first, let's look under the hood, because here's where this gets really interesting. The brain's wash cycle. While you sleep, two things are happening that most people have never been told about. The first involves a molecule called adenosine. Adenosine is, essentially, your brain's measure of how long you've been awake. Every hour that passes, it builds up, and as it accumulates, it creates what scientists call sleep pressure. That heavy, slow, can't keep my eyes open feeling that arrives reliably in the late evening. Sleep, at its most fundamental level, is your body's mechanism for clearing that buildup. The problem? If your sleep is fragmented, if you're waking up at the wrong point in your cycle, or if the quality of what you're getting isn't deep enough, you wake up the next morning with adenosine still lingering in the system. Researchers have a phrase for this, an adenosine lag. Your brain is foggy not because you didn't sleep, but because the clearance process didn't finish. It's a chemical hangover, without the alcohol. Now, the second mechanism, and this one genuinely changes how you think about sleep once you understand it. While you're in deep sleep, your brain runs what scientists have described as its own internal cleaning system. It's called the glymphatic system, and the way it works is almost hard to believe. The brain essentially expands the spaces between its cells and uses cerebrospinal fluid to flush out the metabolic waste that accumulates during the day. The byproducts of thinking, the cellular debris, the biological trash. This only happens properly during deep sleep. Research published in Science confirmed that this clearance process is dramatically more active during sleep than during waking, and that disrupting it leaves the brain, quite literally, unwashed. Think of it like a dishwasher. You put in dirty dishes, you run the cycle, at the end, everything is clean. But if you open the door halfway through, if you interrupt the cycle, the soap is still on the dishes, the water hasn't drained, and you have to run the whole thing again. When you wake up at the wrong moment, pulled out of deep sleep or REM, or the transition between them, that's what's happened to your brain. The cycle was interrupted. The clearance wasn't complete. Which brings us to something that matters enormously, and that most sleep advice completely ignores. Sleep doesn't travel in a straight line. It moves in roughly 90-minute waves, cycles of light sleep, deep sleep, and REM that repeat through the night. And it's worth being clear, 90 minutes is an approximation. These cycles vary from person to person and shift across the night. But here's what that means practically. Waking up after 7 hours might feel dramatically better than waking up after 8, depending entirely on which point in the cycle your alarm caught you. This is also why, if you've ever woken up naturally 5 minutes before your alarm and felt surprisingly alert, that wasn't luck. Your brain completed a cycle. You surfaced at the right moment. Natural waking is always gentler, cleaner, and less disorienting than being dragged out mid-cycle by a sound. But here's the uncomfortable question this raises. If the timing of your waking matters this much, and if the quality of sleep matters more than the quantity, then most of the advice out there isn't just incomplete. It might be solving the wrong problem entirely. You don't have a sleep problem, you have a transition problem. Here's what I want to reframe completely. The assumption most people carried, the assumption James carried, is that more time in bed equals more recovery. 8 hours is better than 7, 9 is better than 8, and if you're tired, the solution is always more. But here's what that model gets completely wrong. 8 hours of sedated sleep, after alcohol, after late night screens, in a room that's even 1 or 2 degrees too warm, is biologically different from 8 hours of restorative sleep. The number is identical. The recovery is not even close. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep. You stay unconscious for hours, but the deep, restoring stages of your sleep cycle are blunted. You wake up having technically slept and feeling like you didn't. A room that's even slightly too warm prevents the core body temperature drop your system needs to transition into deep sleep. So your brain stays in lighter stages all night, cycling through something that looks like sleep but isn't doing the biological work that sleep is supposed to do. And then there's the snooze button. It's worth spending a moment here because the research on this is genuinely illuminating. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Physiological Anthropology looked specifically at what happens to the brain in those broken minutes between snooze alarms. They measured sleep stages, sleep quality, and a measure called global vigor, essentially how alert and ready to function participants felt after waking. What they found makes complete intuitive sense once you hear it. Every time the alarm fires and you fall back asleep, your brain tries to re-enter a sleep cycle, but it doesn't have enough time to get anywhere meaningful. Instead of dropping into restorative sleep, it hovers in stage N1, a drowsy, non-restorative state that's essentially the neurological equivalent of treading water. The glymphatic clearance process can't run in N1. The adenosine isn't clearing. You're burning time without recovering anything. The study found that using a snooze alarm prolonged sleep inertia compared to waking from a single alarm. More critically, participants who woke without snooze showed significantly better global vigor, that sense of feeling ready to function, compared to those who did. That's what was happening to James. Every extra snooze cycle felt like a rescue. It was making things worse. But here's the thing, this isn't about willpower, and it's almost never just one thing. The sleep disruption affects what you reach for when you wake up: the caffeine, the sugar, the fast fuel. What you eat affects how your brain handles stress through the day. The stress affects whether you can wind down at night. And when your days involve sitting still for hours at a time, which most of ours do, none of those systems ever get the physical reset they need to run properly. The fog isn't a sleep problem. It's a full system problem that's expressing itself through sleep. So the real question becomes, what's actually worth changing? And where do you start? Let's talk about it, step by step. The first thing to understand is this: your brain doesn't switch on the moment you open your eyes. It has a startup sequence. And like any startup sequence, it runs better when you work with it, rather than forcing it to perform before it's ready. Stay up. The first shift. Wake up before the alarm and stay up. This might sound counterintuitive, but the logic is worth understanding properly. Your brain moves through sleep in roughly 90-minute cycles, waves of light sleep, deep sleep, and REM that repeat through the night. In the early part of the night, those cycles are weighted toward deep sleep, which is where the heaviest biological restoration happens. As the night progresses, cycles shift. More REM, more light sleep, and progressively less of the slow wave deep stages. This is important because by the time morning arrives, your brain is naturally cycling toward its lightest sleep phases. It's preparing to surface. The architecture of sleep is already working in your favor. If you wake up naturally, 5 minutes before the alarm, feeling vaguely alert, that's your brain completing a cycle and surfacing at exactly the right moment. The clearance process has run. The transition is clean. The instinct is to roll over and take those extra minutes. But here's what actually happens when you do. You risk re-entering the beginning of a new sleep cycle. one your body knows it won't have time to finish. Your brain attempts to drop back toward deeper stages anyway, and when the alarm fires 10 minutes later, it catches you mid-descent, in a deeper phase than where you started, with more sleep inertia, not less. The research is clear on this. Waking mid-cycle, especially when preceded by repeated forced awakenings from snooze, produces measurably worse alertness and cognitive performance than a single, well-timed wake. So here's the practical approach. Set your alarm slightly later than you need to wake up. Not as a snooze buffer, as a safety net. A quiet reassurance that you will not oversleep. Then, if your body surfaces naturally before it fires, treat that as the signal. Get up. That's the right exit point. You won't always wake before the alarm, especially early on. That's fine. The alarm catches you on the nights it needs to. But over time, with consistent sleep and wake times, which I'll come to in a moment, your body will calibrate. It learns the rhythm. The alarm becomes less necessary. You start surfacing naturally, at the right moment, without being dragged out mid-cycle. Consistent sleep and wake times matter enormously here. Research on the circadian pacemaker shows that the body's internal clock is extraordinarily precise, but it depends on regularity to stay calibrated. When you wake at the same time every day, including weekends, your body learns to complete its final cycle in time for that window. The transition becomes smoother, lighter, and more reliably timed. Setting the alarm a few minutes later than your natural target isn't laziness, it's strategic. The peace of mind that you have a backstop removes the low-level anxiety that keeps some people from sleeping soundly in the first place. You're giving your body the conditions it needs to surface on its own, and the security to do so without tension. The second shift, light before coffee. Within the first 30 minutes of waking, get outside or near a bright window. Real light, not a screen, not a lamp. Natural photons hitting the retina signal to your brain that the day has started, suppressing residual melatonin and beginning your body's cortisol awakening response, a natural early morning cortisol rise that primes alertness, energy, and focus for the hours ahead. This is your biology's built-in activation mechanism, and it runs on light. 10 minutes. Outside or by a bright window if outside isn't possible. That's it. The third shift, water before caffeine. The glymphatic system, the brain's overnight cleaning crew, needs hydration to function. After 8 hours without fluids, it's running low. Caffeine in that state doesn't clear the fog, it masks it. You're painting over a problem that hasn't been resolved. Have water first. Give the system what it needs to complete its clearance. Then, and this is the part most people skip, wait roughly 60 to 90 minutes before the coffee. Long enough for your natural adenosine clearance to do its work without caffeine blocking the receptors prematurely. Caffeine works by occupying the adenosine receptors in your brain, essentially parking in the spaces where adenosine would otherwise signal tiredness. But if you take it the moment you wake up, you're occupying those receptors before your body has had the chance to clear the overnight adenosine naturally. You delay the clearance, build tolerance faster, and create a dependence on caffeine that masks the problem rather than solving it. Wait. Let the system run. Then use caffeine as an enhancement, not an emergency measure. What you'll notice is that the coffee hits differently, cleaner, more sustained, less of a spike, less of a crash. If you recognize James in yourself or in someone you know, these 3 shifts are exactly where to start. Not because the problem is simple, but because the entry point doesn't have to be complicated. Wake at a consistent time. If your body surfaces early, trust it and get up. Set the alarm a little later if you need the security of a backstop. Get natural light within 30 minutes. Water before caffeine. And give yourself time for the clearance to complete before you reach for the cup. These aren't hacks. They're the conditions your brain already needs to finish what it started overnight. If you want to understand what's driving that heavy, blank wall that hits in the early afternoon, the one that makes words feel slippery and focus feel impossible, I break that down in the next episode. Your Space Today is published every Tuesday at 6 p.m. For detailed information, disclaimers, scientific references, visit the links below this podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider regarding any health concerns